Good evening and welcome to the 40th anniversary reunion of the Journalist Fellows from the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. Please welcome Professor Rasmus Kleis-Nielsen, Director of the Reuters Institute, to officially open the reunion and introduce our esteemed keynote speaker, Vice-Chancellor Professor Irene Tracey.
Welcome, everyone, to the 40th reunion of the Reuters Institute Journalist Fellowship Program. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rasmus Nielsen. I'm director of the Institute right now, building on the great legacy left by many, many colleagues, some of whom are here in the room today, and the fantastic team that I'm privileged to work with today. We are immensely grateful for the opportunity to be part of the University of Oxford, and firmly believe that each of you takes something away from that experience when you're here as fellows, share something with other fellows, but also, importantly, we believe you make this university better. That's not a view that's always been universally shared. What a monstrous thing to teach journalism in a university. I thought that was only done at Oxford. This respect for the filthy multitude is really ruining civilization. That is a quote from the British philosopher Bertrand Russell. You can tell from the attitude that he's a Cambridge man. Now, some of you might imagine that I have encountered similar sentiments here at the University of Oxford. I couldn't possibly comment. But I do think there is something important underlying this sort of sneery attitude, which is sort of the question of what is really the reason for having the practice of journalism being part of a research university like the University of Oxford? And I think part of it is difference, right? Difference makes us, I think, better, stronger. We learn new things by meeting people who have different experiences, different backgrounds, different lives from our own, different expertise, different forms of insight. But perhaps also commonality, and I would say at least two things that science as a vocation and parts of journalism as a vocation have in common: truth and change. I think these are both two occupational groups, two professions that are committed to the idea of the pursuit of truth for, I think there is a nicer word than the filthy multitude. We could call it the public, right? Not for any one organized interest or one part of society, but for everybody in principle. That's the one thing I think that scientists and journalists have in common. And the other one I think is change, is that we all always have to re-examine not just what we are doing and how we're doing it, but also who we are doing it for, right? The history of this university is in part a history of closed doors that were forced open from the inside and from the outside to serve wider and more diverse parts of the public. And this too, I think, is something that journalists can recognize. Our keynote speaker this evening can speak to some of these issues around the relationship between science and journalism, the place of journalism in modern societies and the modern research university. We are tremendously lucky to have with us tonight an eminent neuroscientist, an experienced leader of universities, most recently as Vice-Chancellor of this university and previously head of house at Merton College here in Oxford, but also a scientist who amazingly has found in her busy schedule also the time to think about the relationship between science and journalism and actively participate in BBC TV documentaries, to create and present radio programs about her work, and of course feature as a source and write herself for more general interest publications. So with all of that as an intro, it is a great pleasure for me to introduce Professor Irene Tracey. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Rasmus, and let me start by welcoming you all back to Oxford. It's a very warm evening, so I can see you already fanning. We've opened, we have no aircon. Very sustainable and very economical. So please do feel free to be relaxed and take off jackets if you wish. I might well do that, so forgive me if I do. Thank you to the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism for this very, very kind invitation to join your 40th anniversary celebrations and to deliver this speech. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion with Mitali later, who, as you know, is the Director of the Journalist Programmes at the Institute, and I know will be a fabulous acting director of the Institute this coming term when Rasmus gets a well-earned sabbatical and will hopefully not be pestered by the Institute. Thank you also, Mitali, for giving me a lot of information, facts and figures. I'm just massively plagiarising, frankly, what she's given me. A terrible way to start a talk in front of a bunch of journalists. And Rasmus, can I also just say, on behalf of the university, congratulations to you on all that you have achieved as director here with the Institute. It's an institute that we're incredibly proud of. So it's been an absolute delight since I started my role in January to start to get to know parts of the university that were well less known to me beyond medical sciences and to a certain extent another division within university, maths and physical sciences. And the Reuters Institute is one such example, and I do congratulate you for the vision that you set in establishing it and in the excellence by which you have maintained that vision over these 40 years. It really is cause for celebration. So I welcome you again back to Oxford on this glorious autumn evening, and I wish you well for the reunion over the weekend. In this speech, I'm not going to say too much about myself. If you want to know more about me and my vision for the university, you're very welcome to watch my YouTube recording of my inauguration speech in January. It's a sure cure for insomnia. It's 30 minutes long, but it does detail a little bit about me, my background, the fact that I am an alumna of this great university, and apart from 2 years as a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard Medical School, have spent all my academic career in Oxford as a pain neuroscientist, which has often been said is a very good training for becoming Vice-Chancellor. I have been head of one of the larger departments in medical sciences and head of my former college, Merton College, alongside various other national, international leadership roles. So as such, as Rasmus mentioned, I have had many interactions, I have to say very positive on the whole, with the media in my role both as a scientist and as an academic leader. These relationships I value, I have tremendous respect for, and I hope that in this new role I might extend, as I do believe that we have much in common, both as educators and as curators of truth. Some elements of your profession might lean towards more entertainment than ours, but we do share probably more common ground than might at first be appreciated. But before I share some thoughts, as it is a celebration, I thought I'd take a moment just to highlight some of the key features of what the RSJ has achieved since its inception and remind you a little of its 40-year history. You saw some of the photographs there, and of which you should be very proud because you have all shaped and played a key part of its history and its success. Obviously, in the 1980s and 1990s, it was initiated in the backdrop of intense political upheaval across Europe, turbulent post-Soviet transition, dramatic fall of the Berlin Wall, images that will be etched in our memories. A fledgling idea to support journalism was conceived in Oxford. The Reuters Fellowship was created to bring the world of journalism and journalists into the fold of the University of Oxford. Fellows from Serbia, Germany, the Czech Republic, Croatia, Albania, Bulgaria, Russia, Palestine and Somalia travelled to Oxford and took on difficult and politically contentious topics like European migration politics in their work. The 1990s saw the fellowship grow, both in size and reach, with journalist fellows spanning Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia and New Zealand. It was the advent of the internet, as we know it today, and a lot of the papers presented by journalist fellows reflected issues that still remain critical to the world of journalism and wider societies. The role of the free press and democracy, the impact of the internet on newspapers, gender equality in the media, and global warming, to name but a few. The 2000s, though, were the most seminal decade, in a sense, for the Reuters Journalism Fellowship, and in no small measure thanks to the unwavering support of the Thomson Reuters Foundation that has funded activities at Oxford for over 30 years. And it is with the Foundation's support that an institute dedicated to journalism and the public they serve was born then in 2006. And let me here take a moment to thank the Thomson Reuters Foundation for their steadfast support and for their vision. Philanthropy is the fuel that feeds a university and allows it to develop in innovative and bolder ways and to be agile in tackling issues of the day in an unshackled way. Oxford remains immensely grateful for the extensive philanthropic support it receives, and that includes the Thomson Reuters Foundation. When the Reuters Institute was established in 2006, Tim Garden, then principal of St Anne's College, Oxford, and chair of the Reuters Institute Steering Committee, wrote this in The Guardian on the idea behind the RISJ. Great power demands scrutiny. This has been the premise on which journalists have interrogated and held to account government and authority. Yet journalism itself, particularly in this country, does not receive the same intelligent scrutiny of its own power. The media world talks to itself all the time, and the claustrophobic debate goes round in circles. But Britain lacks an arena where the operations of journalism and its public policy implications can be seriously thought through, and where anecdote and allegation can be tested by evidential research. The establishment of the Reuters Institute at Oxford University, announced last week, will open in the autumn, is designed to meet that need. So in the 2000s, many gathered here and witnessed life as we know it and as it began to shape-shift. There was a global financial crisis, a rise of populism, pressure on democracies, and most importantly, new and unknown terrain for journalists and the wider public with the advent of large social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter. It is especially noteworthy that this is also the period when the Reuters Institute began to conduct research into many of these aspects, giving it the unique distinction of being one of the very few institutions of academic rigour and excellence that was documenting in real time the fragmentation and the tectonic shifts in the world of news and how all of us would go on to watch or read or listen to it. The digital news report that started with 5 countries in 2012 today spans 46 markets that account for more than half the world's population. As an example, it is only because of RISJ's research that a fact like this is documented. 59% of people in the UK got their news from print in 2012. 14% do so now. 33% of Japanese get their news from their phones in 2015. 60% did in 2022. 62% of Brazilians trusted most news most of the time in 2015. 43% say they do so today. Through large political and economic upheavals like Brexit, strongman governments, and a much more challenging financial environment, journalists, just like academics, will recall another tangible change: the rise of disinformation, a phenomenon that became widespread and dangerous when the world was struck by a pandemic. The Reuters Institute doubled down on its research efforts around journalism and the pandemic, focusing on communications, because every crisis has shown us that communication is central to that crisis, including a public health crisis. And it's central to the political discussion around how we, as a society, handle them. Today, in 2023, the Institute is no longer an emerging idea, but a nodal point for journalism, firmly committed to seeking truth and reporting it, globally focused and specifically structured to bring together world-class research and engagement with practitioners at all levels and to improve the quality of journalism worldwide. The Institute is international in thought and purpose, and while its home remains in Oxford, the Institute's roots and branches spread across the world with digital-only initiatives like the Oxford Climate Journalism Network, engagement with news leaders across the world, and encompassing more languages, including Spanish and Italian. So once again, congratulations on your collective achievements and a very happy 40th anniversary. So now let me share some thoughts on the parallels between academia and journalism. At its best, journalism has the ability to take on a shared role with academia as curators of truth and educators at heart. In the academic sector, we are well aware of our educational and discovery research role. But we are also increasingly aware of the importance that curating truth, for want of a better expression, plays. In the rise of disinformation, AI, short attention spans, I could go on, where does grand truth reside? What trusted body is going to curate it? And what must we do to protect the importance of curation as a society? For both journalist and academic, discovering, sharing, and curating the truth involves a constant journey. In the case of the academic, I'm thinking particularly the scientist, this is through the process of hypothesis setting, data gathering, intensive research and analysis, followed by exposing the results to scrutiny, the peer review process, and eventually, we hope, publication. Ideas, discoveries, theories evolve, and we have the story of that evolution curated in our academic journals or books, our libraries, and now our databases. We increasingly have the curation of the actual data for sciences in open and shared databases, so that there is full transparency, and so that other researchers might use or mine that data to verify the original hypothesis or test additional hypotheses. In the case of journalism, truth-seeking is through investigative journalism and independent political and economic journalism in polarized societies. I'm keen to discuss, maybe later in the discussion, how the source material you have is shared, archived, and tested for absolute truth or reporting. Are the mechanisms there, and have we got it right when it comes to calling out, akin to what happens in peer review, when something in the media is over-egged or just plain wrong? For me, this comes to the fore in science and health reporting, and increasingly with climate reporting. The repercussions of getting it wrong are profound. Accountability is everything, and I do worry that we've not got it quite right in your profession. Academic research or teaching, as well as journalism, both need to be free to explore potentially contentious issues without limits, whether those are imposed by politicians or groups seeking to impose a line in any particular area. While free speech and open debate are the cornerstones of robust societies in many parts of the world, there are now increasing cases where institutions of power and authority are clamping down on both professions, with an aim to stymie free speech and undermine independent and critical thought, or create no-go zones of curiosity-led research. It is in times such as these that it becomes vital for both academics and journalists to speak in support of and vigorously defend free speech, a reflection of societies that value the importance of both discovering and curating the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is, for the benefit of all, and to help societies evolve well, giving voice to underrepresented groups or views. But that does not mean we have to tolerate or condone, in the name of free speech and within our organisations, commentary that is abusive, hurtful and discourteous. We have to be better than that, and we have to lead the way to show what good looks like. I spoke about trusted bodies earlier and their importance in a complex world. Now, I'm bound to say this as Vice-Chancellor of one of the world's leading universities, but I do believe institutions like Oxford and our other great universities have been, should be, and hopefully will always be those trusted bodies. But we must be vigilant and not arrogant, having earned that privilege and responsibility. But what about trust in your profession, in the news? Well, as in previous years, the RSIJ has done the research, and they have found that the highest trust levels for news are in countries such as Finland, 69%, Portugal, 58%, lower trust levels in countries with higher degrees of political polarization, such as the United States, 32%, Argentina, 30%, Hungary, 25%, and Greece, 19%. It's intriguing how this maps onto broader issues of trust, if you didn't know, within those countries and societies that also relates, in fact, unusually, to their happiness and well-being score. If you want to learn more about this, listen to my Fire and Wire podcast, where I interview Professor Deneve, an economist professor here in the university and director of the Wellbeing Centre, who talks about the impact of well-being and how trust in society leads directly to the outcomes in terms of good happiness and well-being and, indeed, economic improved productivity. So perhaps unexpectedly, trust in the news in the UK continues to fall to 33%, say that they trust the news most of the time, 1 percentage point less than last year. Interest in the news is also plummeting. 43% of people say they are very or extremely interested in the news, and that was 70% just 7 years ago. So against that rather bleak backdrop of plummeting percentages and numbers, I can say there is a heartening sign for the United Kingdom in that our public service broadcasters, the BBC News, Channel 4, ITV News, are the top 3 most trusted news sources, a sign that there is an important role to be played, perhaps by news organisations that provide reliable news that is free to access and read for a wider public, something for us all to cogitate on. Now let me turn to misinformation and fake news. A common challenge in this quest for truth and protecting it has been the tidal wave of misinformation and fake news that we have witnessed over the years. And the worrying fact that by the time something might have been bottomed out and corrected, everyone has moved on to the next exciting thing in our relentless need to fill a 24-hour news cycle. Since COVID, this has spilled over from politics to the environment, health and vaccines posing a severe challenge to independent research and journalism alike. In the RSIJ's recently published digital news report for 2023, they found that when looking across 46 countries at the types of misinformation that people claim to see, dubious health claims around COVID-19, including from anti-vaccination groups, are still widespread, along with false or misleading information about politics. The team has also found that environmental groups across countries included in their report say that climate change denialism has been making a stark comeback on social media, with misleading advertisements on Facebook and other networks, and viral hashtags such as #ClimateScam on Twitter, which critics say has been failing to properly moderate harmful content since that takeover by Elon Musk. Misinformation often comes from people in authority, which makes the concept of who to trust contentious, difficult, and therefore so important to get right. Trust is increasingly fragile. As the great Lady Gaga says, trust is like a mirror. You can fix it if it's broken, but you can still see the crack in that mother bleep reflection. I'll let you plug in the bleep. There is less deference towards figureheads, institutions, established authorities, which could be argued as a good thing as more people choose to challenge ideas and conventions. But it also begs the question, who then do we trust? In a world that is now unpacking the AI phenomenon, combating misinformation becomes more important than ever, but for the reasons above, also harder to do. I feel for you as you face many challenges, some overlapping with those we face in academia. You too face a crisis in funding and a crisis of attention in journalism. I understand that the economic challenges facing the news industry have led to layoffs in many countries. Many of you gathered here in the room tonight are probably working under far more pressure than you did 20 or 10 years ago. Some news companies have responded by building pay models online, and these have succeeded in some major brands such as the Financial Times and the New York Times, but they inevitably limit access to their journalism. And I ask you to reflect on the data supporting free access to information, bringing the trust with the public stations in the UK. And the economic crisis means that many people have had to rethink how much they can afford to spend on their news media, as noted again in the RSIJ's Digital News Report 2023. We have a shared concern over the crisis of attention. There is no doubt there is a marked and changing nature of social media. People are now moving away from networks such as Facebook and towards video networks like TikTok. I have witnessed that shift with my own children and with my interactions with students. Again, the RSJ data confirms our intuition, more cleverly than ever, that this shift is indeed strongly influenced by habits of the younger generations who have grown up with social media and nowadays often pay more attention to influencers or celebrities than they do to journalists, even when it comes to the news, and I fear too, scientific findings and facts. In the Digital News Report 23, it states the proportion of new consumers who say they avoid news often or sometimes remain close to all-time highs as 36% across the markets. That is a very worrying fact. So, who calls it out? My daughter is an aspiring media law barrister, and I can understand why she's so driven to specialise in this area that has plenty of room for developing laws and regulation when it comes to fake news, misinformation, accountability, reputation, defamation, revenge porn, copyright. Again, I could go on. Let me now turn to the specific relationship then between journalists and academics. Now, on the negative side, as I said, mostly my experience has been very positive with the interactions that I have had, but it is true that there is often friction in the relationship between academics, scientists, and journalists. While the world of science and academics has felt misrepresented by irresponsible reporting or hasty quotes, journalists, I know, have found it frustrating when scientists have not moved with haste and information has been slow. The classic overhyped headline from your end versus the jargon-filled response. The fear from your end of anything too sciencey, or God forbid a graph or correlation, and the desire to have binary clarity for the story versus the scientist nuanced, the data suggests, indicates, implies. There is the need for both better communication from academics and scientists and more responsible engagement on the part of journalists. We also need to skill up journalists, and this is something that we're addressing in the university, not specifically for journalists, but I'd be very happy to discuss it further in the discussion as to how we can address, I think, some of the fears that journalists who are drawn largely from a humanities background, particularly from the UK system, struggle, I think, with some of the scientific jargon and limit the ability to report at the level that I think many of us feel the public can take and needs to take if they're going to understand, make policy decisions and move on. It's also important to recognise that expert opinion enjoys a high degree of trust. Journalists and news organisations must help provide for experts to communicate better. As COVID demonstrated and continuing climate change expertise shows, there is value and credibility in niche and specific expertise. Social media has had an interesting outcome because scientists and academics can reach out to a wider audience directly via their Twitter handles or other social media accounts, as opposed to being profiled in a story by a journalist. The stark reality, however, is that direct engagement is a powerful tool, but it comes at a cost. High-profile women, including journalists, are subjected to online abuse uniquely mediated and expressed via the internet, but intrinsically related to offline behaviours. The biggest challenge we now face is around climate. The Guardian reports that some of the UK's top scientists are struggling to deal with what they describe as a high rise in abuse and climate crisis deniers. My husband is a climate researcher, and again, I'll be happy to expand on the journey he's taken in his career in terms of interacting with the media. And so we have climate deniers on Twitter, and it's risen since the social media platform was taken over by Elon Musk. So this is the time to build a more authentic relationship between scientific expertise and the world of journalism. And I look to organisations like the Science Media Centre in London, led by the fantastic Chief Executive Fiona Fox and her team, who do incredible work to provide journalists with what they need in the time frame they need it, from interviews with leading experts to timely press briefings on hot topics, and to provide scientists free events to introduce experts to the news media, as well as advice and support to scientists on media engagement and how to do it well, and to provide our press officers an independent press office at the Science Media Centre who they can work closely with within the university sector, scientific companies, research funders, and engineering institutions. The only way to fight misinformation and continue to remain loyal curators of truth is to work in collaboration. So on the positive side of the relationship between us, two important milestones have changed the relationship and pointed to ways where this relationship can indeed be strengthened: the COVID pandemic and now the ongoing climate crisis. The COVID-19 Trust Bump. The Nuffield Foundation funded an 8-month research project published in October 2020. And in the Reuters Institute report, authors looked at 3 key lessons learned on communications in the coronavirus crisis for the UK. They focused on communications because communication is central to any crisis, including a public health crisis. And it's central to the political discussion around how we as a society handle them. In terms of the broad public, the simplest suggestion for communications in the next stages of the coronavirus crisis in their report was to focus less on politicians and pundits, except where absolutely necessary, and more on the sources that are A, highly and broadly trusted, and B, demonstrably help people understand the crisis, most notably the NHS and scientists, doctors, and other experts. Their climate research across audiences of 8 countries, including the UK, found that overall those who follow climate change come across a wide variety of different sources featured in the coverage, including scientists, political actors, energy companies, and environmental activists. It is important, however, to recognise that respondents do not see all these different sources as equally credible. Across all countries, scientists are highly and broadly trusted. It warms my heart. Whereas political actors and energy companies are regarded with considerable scepticism. In terms of trust, news media themselves are generally in the middle of the range of sources, and authors ask people to rate, and but they are more trusted than the energy companies and politicians, so there's some hope there, but less so than us, the scientists. And in many cases, less so than international institutions such as the UN. So finally, and in conclusion, how do we build an authentic relationship? Well, again, I quote from RISJ, an academic paper wrote on the question, does the news media exacerbate or reduce misinformation problems? And they had the following key observations. The findings challenge the notion that news media in general, by drawing people's attention to false and misleading content, leave the public more misinformed, and support the idea that news generally helps people become more informed, and in some cases, more resilient to misinformation. In answer to the opening question, can news help? Their results were a clear yes. Thank heavens you've still got a job. And their results suggest it is important to complement efforts at fighting misinformation with efforts to get reliable news and information out as widely as possible. News media can thus play an important role in helping people become more informed and more resilient to misinformation, both by engaging in fact-checking and other practices that aim at identifying rubbish and debunking it, and by staying true to their classic mission of seeking truth and reporting it to the whole public as educators. The key then is to draw on examples where collaborative bridges have worked, and there are some examples. The Conversation. In the UK, is part of the Conversation International Network. It's made up of 8 editions which operate in 12 countries. A membership organisation funded by university partners and research sector funding bodies. It is an independent source of news analysis and informed comment written by academic experts working with professional journalists who help them share their knowledge with the world. Peer-reviewed journals, like the ones I would publish in, like The Lancet, independent, international, weekly, general journals and specialist journals are a vital repository of information around a public health emergency like COVID, a resource that was used by health journalists around the world. And they have created a COVID-19 resource centre where all the content is open access, which is fairly standard now for medical journals. Research active experts producing and being directly involved in radio, television series, like Rasmus kindly mentioned, the ones I've been involved with. And that must happen in addition to what we call the celebrity scientist. During COVID, Germany's public broadcaster NDR featured the prominent German scientist Christian Drosten on Das Coronavirus, a podcast where he shared scientific information on the pandemic. After just 2 daily episodes, Das Coronavirus update shot to #1 on Apple Podcasts in Germany. Our World in Data is a collaborative effort between researchers at the University of Oxford, who are the scientific editors of the website content, and the non-profit organisation Global Change Data Lab, who publishes and maintains the website and the data tools that make that work. Our World in Data's mission is to publish the research and data to make progress against the world's largest problems. It takes a journalistic approach to presenting complex data that affects many. And the most read piece in the history of El País, Spain's most respected newspaper, was an article on how you get COVID in different places. The piece essentially visualized super-spreading scenarios and their impact. It calculated the risk of infection from COVID-19 using a tool developed by José Luis Jiménez, an atmospheric chemist at the University of Colorado and an expert in the chemistry and dynamics of air particles, and a loud voice which increases the amounts of aerosols expelled. So an authentic relationship should cultivate critical thinking and value demonstrably reliable knowledge. As the Digital News Report 23 found, for most people across ages and countries, the key objective is not to make the feed more fun or more interesting, but rather to make it more reliable, less toxic, and with greater diversity of views. Yet despite these clearly stated preferences, social media companies competing for attention and advertising continue to optimize for engagement and entertainment, with less attention to increasing quality, reliability, or diversity. People need to relearn that there's nothing more entertaining or engaging than revealing the truth about the world we live in, from the magic of the earth we occupy to the stars and planets above, to how our bodies and minds work, through to how we live as societies and with other species. And that is where the opportunity lies to build a more authentic relationship between academics, scientists, and journalists, to not just be truth seekers and educators of that truth, but to ensure we curate that truth for generations to come. Thank you for the kind invitation to speak. Congratulations to the RISJ on its 40th anniversary, and I look forward to learning how I, in my position as Vice-Chancellor at the University of Oxford, as well as the university, can support you and your honourable profession of journalism going forwards. Thank you.
Please welcome the current Director of Journalism Programs, Mitali Mukherjee, to moderate Q&A.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor, for those very warm words. I think a lot of what you said will not only linger in this room for a long time, but also spans many decades and many experiences, some of which I wasn't part of, but I know the last 40 years in this room reflect. In the spirit of transparency, may I also apologize for having sent you many cold emails, then following up on those cold emails, just like every journalist, and I also tried to follow you on Twitter. Sadly, didn't find you there, but I got a response fairly fast, so thank you for that. So many important points that you raised. I'm wondering where to open the innings before I open up the room for it. You talked about sharing of source material and what journalists use as their policy there. Trust, how it's important to skill journalists, how climate is now increasingly becoming sort of that dangly knot that we need to untangle. But let me start by asking you a more broad-based question of, you know, there's so much talk through this evening and otherwise about how institutions that are regarded highly should do more and speak out more for freedom of speech, for supporting the press. There is change expected there. There is solidarity expected there. But what does real actionable support look like? Because for many people in this room, how journalism is practiced in the United Kingdom is frankly a privilege. There is state pushback, there is financial pressure, and in many cases there is the complete absence of a voice that can even speak out in support.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and obviously it's a very live point, and the free speech issue has been a very active one. Forgive me, I'll move forward so you can see me. Since the start of my tenure. Actually, it's one I'm hoping I can move on to other issues now going forward, because it has sort of slightly dominated. I mean, I think it's in our DNA as academics and in academic institutions. You know, we never thought of it as free speech because it's just so part of how we think about interrogating to find out the truth about a topic that you are researching, that we've never sort of separated it apart from just it's part of the academic method and training. Obviously, these days, it's become badged as the free speech thing. So underneath it, I think there's a whole array of different aspects that different people have different definitions of what they mean by that. I would like to think and hope, but I'd be guided by you, that you do feel that certainly in this country and some of the other main countries with the main big academic institutions, that they have done a reasonable job in stepping up and defending it and being quite public about the importance of places like this being the sort of strongholds of where free speech matters, where we can educate the next generation of students to understand what that means. And as I have done and do when I talk to the students, explain to them that when you are learning your subject area, we teach you to learn about it from many different people's points of view, some of whom you might disagree with and some you agree with. And then we ask you to synthesize all that and come up with your own particular position on it, irrespective of whether that's in the humanities or the sciences or the social sciences. And that's basically free speech, because you've got the free speech of the source material you're looking at, or the different journal articles where one person is saying this is how the scientific thing works and somebody's saying that, and they have a right to say that, and then you synthesize it and then produce your thinking. And what you need to start to do is do that just in life as you go out after your student experience here into the world, because that's the way the world works, in that people are going to have different views. And you've got to be willing to engage with those different views and be very clear then when you synthesize that, you know, what's your particular position on something. Yeah. And I know that's easy for us to say in countries where we're allowed to have and express those different views, but that's the sort of element of how we think about helping our students understand in what is a very hot topic around free speech, the importance of it, the fact that it isn't intrinsically different to how you're being trained to think anyway in your subject area. It's just now got this label, and with it comes all the connotations of that label, which I certainly know that in some campuses in the US has become very politicized and has become very limiting then for the educative experience, which is a real problem. Yes. So I think in this country, I would hope that we've done well. I think, you know, the one thing I do appreciate is that in this role, I have a platform, rightly or wrongly, but as Vice-Chancellor of this university, I do have a platform upon which I can be deployed to stand up for issues and to highlight issues. And that, frankly, is a very attractive part of the job to me, is the privilege that I have to do that, and how best to use that voice and that platform that I have in order to push things forwards, to evolve, to raise uncomfortable issues, and to encourage a healthy discussion and debate around them. So, you know, I know that this is not the case in all academic institutions and in all countries. And as you know, we've spoken about one of the things that we're very keen to do, you know, in collaboration with the Reuters, is to think about how we can further support journalists in countries where there really is a limitation in being able to express a view and get that truth out, how we can create some mentorship and some training, drawing on you as alumni and others, and there's a few leading journalists who've approached me who are very keen to establish this, so that we can further, again, develop the ability for journalists to be able to speak truth to power, to do it without, again, risk for their lives, and again, for us to play our part as an academic institution to support and do that. So again, these are just a few of the sort of reflections that I've had sort of 8 months in.
Thank you for that. We are a nodal point, but I cannot presume to speak for the more than 90 countries that this room spans this evening. So let me open it up for questions. A simpler way to do it perhaps would be for you to raise your hands. I'll try and take questions in clusters so we can then pose them to the Vice-Chancellor. What would be great would be if you could introduce yourself by way of name and the country you represent.
My name's Richard Lawson. I'm a journalist at BBC Radio 5 Live here in the UK. It was fascinating hearing you speak. The next story I'm worried I will get wrong as a programme maker is AI, and you've seen so much coverage about that recently. I just wondered if you had any reflections generally on how the media across the world has covered this and what you think we need to get right in future.
Okay.
Shall we gather a few more from this side? I think I saw a hand.
You'll keep a note of all these
I
questions.
am indeed. My notepad is ready.
Yeah.
I'm John Kelly. I'm a writer at the Washington Post. If I can get specific, this year the head of Stanford University resigned, a neuroscientist who was not found guilty of fraud himself, but of possibly not overseeing the research and the data as well as he could have. I wondered if you followed that story and what you thought of both sides, how the academics handled it and how the media handled it, and what could be improved on both sides.
Yeah, okay.
Perhaps at the front, to the gentleman.
Good evening, Tim Ripley. I'm an alumni from 1991.
Hi.
I'm a journalist specialising in defence foreign affairs. And you talked about the fake news and the disinformation culture. My experience is that this is ingrained in the British political class. They are completely think it's normal. They are, you know, from the, you know, they don't have any morals about it. And perhaps we've reached a point where it's the only way to defeat it is to make them social pariahs. And we had this year what I call the Spartacus moment, where Gary Lineker published his thing, and journalists in Britain, public figures, stood up and said, "We're with him." And the politicians in Britain squirmed. And maybe that's a moment for you, as the Vice-Chancellor. You could give Gary Lineker an honorary degree and take away Boris Johnson and Tony Blair's. And it's just an example of how they are completely immoral.
Yes.
They have no, they don't care what, you know, this kind of debate. They just want advantage.
You'd be happy to know that last year an honorary degree was given to Lise Doucette from the BBC. And my country of origin is India. I can assure you the political class and a moral compass are not a sentence that we have framed together. But let me pose some of those questions there.
AI,
neuroscience, and of course fake news.
I think actually, I mean, the AI, I'm very, obviously as a scientist, I'm, you know, incredibly excited and curious about the powers of AI. You know, it's one branch of it's been born from things that we've been doing actually for quite a long time, and I've used in machine learning in terms of, I was a neuroimager, I was a pain neuroscientist, I used brain imaging. So some of the techniques behind it we've used actually for quite a while, and we've seen the potential of being able to sort of read the brain and map things, and the efficiencies that can bring, and the benefits. So there's an incredibly exciting side of AI, which I think we're all, you know, very aware of. in the scientific community and particularly the medical community about what it can empower and bring. You know, the drug discovery, the scale at which you can pull information which, you know, you can't do as much in a human brain, and start to see connections and come up with completely novel combinations of how you would synthesize something or do whatever to lead to then novel compounds and drugs. So there's this huge, fantastically exciting side of it. And I think to a certain extent, I think actually the journalistic profession, the ones that the articles I've read, have done a really good job and have worked hard to try and understand what actually is a really complex area of science that's improving all the time. Then there's the sort of ethics of it, where it starts to get really dark and shady, because then when you start to think about some of the other uses of it, and you start to go back and really, if you understand how it works, which I have a understanding of, you know, not at a deep mathematical level, but at a reasonable level, it's very clear that, you know, decisions to get taken about what the information that's going in and where the decision trees are about how that information is curated and then used. And so that's when it gets very interesting about the ethical side of it, as to who's making those decisions. You know, very geopolitically Western, very Anglophile in lots of the information going in. The decision points at what's going to be done at certain parts where it would feed then an outcome. Again, somebody's making those calls, and those are largely going to be sitting in corporations, should they be. So that's why we need more efforts around how we think about the ethics of it on a long-term timescale, the real philosophical ethics of it, and the short-term sort of regulation. What are we going to do just to maybe pause it a bit and put regulations on so we can at least be sure we don't end up too far down some paths that we're very worried about. And that's not new in science. If you think about some of the sort of other ethical things that have come along in science, like look at stem cell research and the use of embryos and whatever, scientists are going to be driven to, you know, clone and make a human embryo, and etc. We do that. We often do it and then realize, oh my God, we haven't thought about the ethics of it. Honestly, that's how it works, because you're just so curiosity-led, which is why we try to, with our students, teach more about ethics and the responsibility side, particularly in the neurosciences with neuroethics, because the brain has more than just, you know, it's what makes society, because it's what drives you as animals, right? And it's obviously got lots of interesting things to discover because the things that go wrong in the brain, but it's really interesting to understand because it's what makes you tick, and it's what makes us make our decisions and how we live together in society. So it's got this whole social side of relevance to it, and how we make decisions is really important, and understanding that. And so quite a lot of these sort of tools that are coming out and things are getting at the heart of neuroethics, because that's probably where it's going to first cause us problems. And we hope that in our world, we're trying to get ahead of the curve by thinking about ethics and neuroethics in the training of our students, so that they think about the ethical implications of the discovery before it's out the can. And you can then start to have the conversations with regulators or lawyers about what are you going to do to sort of rein it in. We're here in Oxford, you know, setting up and have set up this AI Centre for Ethics as part of our new humanities building, the Shortston Centre for the Humanities. And so we have a team of people, John Tussalis, who's a philosopher, and working with Nigel Shadbolt, who is an engineering with expertise in artificial intelligence, working in a very collaborative way to think again about that short-term regulatory piece that needs to be done globally, and then the more long-term philosophical framework by which we want to think about how are we going to manage this AI phenomenon. Because it's here to stay, and it's going to become, you know, this incredibly useful thing, but also it's going to change the world in very profound ways. So I think you've done a good job to date. I think you've probably just scratched the surface, if I'm honest with you, of the actual conversations that are going on in the academic sphere about where we know this is going. We're going to be having lots of quite public lectures around this issue next year, so follow it, and I'm very happy to connect anybody with some of the people that are thinking about the ethical side of it if you want to sort of do a deeper dive into some of the issues. We actually have you know, a high density in the UK of some of the leading AI engineering people who are designing the next sort of engineering bits, but we're doing it, we hope, responsibly, because we've set up that ethics centre as well to sort of make sure that the dialogue is happening between the two. So that's a long-winded answer. I do know the ex-head of Stanford very well. I've obviously followed the story. I don't know all the details as ever. There's only so much comes out in the public domain. I think some of the challenges, well, you know, not saying that that's what's happened, because I can't comment on the veracity of what happened in terms of the misinformation. But just like in your world, we have misinformation in science. And in the pressures of publishing, certainly in certain areas and in some countries, the desire to publish and publish well will maybe bias behaviours in ways that are unhelpful. as a scientist, I'm a great believer, truth always out. You know, that apple's going to fall, right? You can't defy gravity. So truth out, data wins. It'll come out. So generally, when there is falsification of data, it comes out, and then that's reputationally it for generally a group. In this particular instance, then there's the sort of who's culpable. Because when you're running a huge team, and you take on lots of other responsibilities, it's going to be difficult to sort of know exactly the detail of what's going on. And different scientists will make different decisions about how well they think they can juggle everything and how close they want to be to the running and operational level of a lab whilst doing other responsibilities. And as I understand it, most of this was in a previous era, not as head of Stanford. And it was a very large team, and there was an individual. Actually, my understanding is that the desirability, once known, to get the data out and the accuracy was absolutely there, you know, from Mark. But, you know, obviously in a very public role like that, and with that having happened, that was the decision that was taken by the board. And again, there's going to be pros and cons in that argument. But it's a great shame because, you know, it's been a terrific neuroscientist. I hope it doesn't mar the excellent contributions, you know, the fabulous contributions that he's made, not just in his field, but more broadly to the neuroscience community. But, you know, this happens, and this can happen to the best of us. On a personal level, you know, I took one of the reasons I needed to be persuaded for 6 months to even apply as Vice Chancellor, because I was not interested at all in the job, if I'm honest with you, was because I'd have to give up my lab, because I knew I couldn't do this job and run a lab at the same time. You just wouldn't have that ability to be on it really close. So, you know, you make those cost balances. I'm very grateful I did. I love the job, so that's good. But, you know, that's the cost for me, is that, you know, having been a scientist for, you know, all my career, you know, it's difficult. You've got to be on it, really close to it. And clearly in the previous one, you know, even on it, you can't control if a student and a postdoc is going to do something, you know, really bad and dodgy and lie. Then, you know, again, you just got to make sure it's a good lesson, I think, because of the publicity that that's brought for other PIs early in their career to think about how do you mitigate and put in measures that when you do become very busy and you've got only so much time to look after your group, you make sure you know what's going on. And then, you know, as I say, Mark did respond immediately. It just, you know, it was perceived that that was too late and therefore there's too much public damage, so they stepped down. So that's that one. And then your one for the sort of misinformation and everything else. It is interesting, this one. I mean, I really worry about this. And as I sort of said in my speech about the fact that by the time you have called it out, if we have called it out, nobody cares anyway, and they've just moved on to the next thing. Not politicians, I'm talking about actually, you know, our kids. And that's a real worry. Nobody seems to care about the truth anyway. And the great one for the Brexit was the bus. You know, by the time somebody proved that wasn't wrong, it didn't matter. In fact, it helped, because people just said, well, I don't care what the answer is. The fact is, money's going, and that's bad. Very clever branding and marketing. So the question's more back to you. How do we change it? You know, it's the calling out question. Have we got the processes? In my world, you know, data outs and things like that happen, it gets called out, and that's the reputation gone. And we have the peer review process. It's not perfect, but we've not come up with a better way of doing it. And people will generally verify in the evolution of how you do science. You'll always do the next step, but through the next step you sort of verify that original one. So you quite quickly catch out if something's not right. And as I say, increasingly, you know, in submitting your paper, you will submit the data. So somebody can just come and look at the data and see if you've, you know, overdone it. So you can be, so it's good because the transparency is there, the source material's there for people to verify and check. So the problem is when, you know, people come up with headlines or stories that is just wrong or just lied, why are we not calling it out better? Because we're clearly not. And when we do, it seems to just actually enhance the position of that one rather than retract it. That's very different from my world. So I don't have an answer for you. I'd love to know what others maybe think on that point, because it strikes me you haven't got the mechanisms in place. And I'm not saying it should be the ones we use. That wouldn't be fit for purpose. And I know we've got, you know, the press regulations and this, that, and the other. But it's more how we as you as a profession, maybe you need to call each other out more. I don't know how it works, but we call each other out all the time in the academic world. But maybe you don't call each other out enough.
Shall we do another sweep? And we also have an online audience that's joined in, and I think there's some questions that have come in for you from there. So
two questions for you, and I'm going to paraphrase them. One is from Rachel in India, who asks about your opinion of Western bias in reporting. I'm going to rephrase her question slightly because you're not a representative of the media, but rather the sciences. And she cites GB News going on air and asking, after the Chandrayaan 3 landed, why a country with poverty would go to the moon. Do you witness similar Western bias in sciences? And then a question from Malva in Venezuela. It's often said we as journalists run away from data and statistics and scientific studies. Are there perhaps Oxford sources that you would recommend more journalists make better use of?
Oh, that's a terrific set of questions. Maybe I should answer those two quickly.
Absolutely. There was a gentleman there, but we can address these first.
So having made the case that we're fabulous and got everything right in the sciences, despite the fact there are things that get made up and get caught out, there are incredible biases in scientific publishing, both in terms of geography and gender, for sure, and institutions. And that's well researched in terms of doing author-blind publications. Same for grants, actually, as well, and success. So we have work to do in our profession, absolutely, to remove those biases and to improve the ability for people to have equal access to, again, publications and publications in the big journals and etc. So there's no doubt we have problems there. And I think that comment and the way that that was reported would be a case in point, but that's not alone, and that would be repeated. So they're absolutely spot on. What do we do about it? Well, what we can do more is, talk about and celebrate things more. And, again, in the platform and the position I have is when there is something like that, to be more vocal as a scientist about some of the incredible work that's being done and put that more on the platform and have more of the institutions that have a greater longevity and more trusted, rightly or wrongly, to be the champions of those new labs and new groups in countries that are developing an incredible scientific base. So that for sure is there. And the second one was about the
pointing to sources within Oxford.
The resources for sort of scientific training and things. Well, this touches a little bit on something that we're going to experiment with here. And, forgive me, but this is a very UK-focused issue I think we have. And I spoke a bit about this in my inauguration speech, the sort of upskilling the de-skilling problem and the upskilling need that we must do, and places like this could probably meet. So the problem we've still got in Britain is we have the great divide at 15-16. You either go down the humanities track or you go down the sciences track, and never the twain shall meet. And occasionally we get students who will mix and match it a bit at A-level, but generally it's a split. And my experience is, on average, when I talk to journalists and politicians in Britain, they have largely gone down the humanities track, and they really are terrified. They hate maths, they're terrified of it, they didn't really like science, or they might have liked it, but they just didn't keep it up. And therefore they are wrongly not confident in engaging in that discussion. And I can't tell you how many times I overhear my husband on the phone with the journalist talking about some climate thing, and he's trying to explain just a basic thing, and it's just, that's not doing so. Well, why bother reporting if there's a basic level below which you can't go, and there's no point even saying if you're not willing to engage, and you're perfectly capable, it's just a blockage. So one of the things we're going to roll out in Oxford, starting in the next term after Christmas, we'll get the syllabus going, is to take, and we'll just start with a couple of hundred students, drawn from every single background, humanities, social sciences, maths and physical sciences, medical sciences, and they're in a melting pot, which will be a really nice, interesting learning experience for them. They will learn through the lens of climate. The scientists will learn how to write, and the humanities will learn a little bit more about maths and physics and stuff, so that when they go, they've learned something, which is useful, because whatever job they're going to go into, they're going to have to deal in some way or other something about the climate. But they'll also have a bit of confidence about some of the science if they're going down on the more journalist or politic route or whatever route they go down. And they'll have some upskilling in that maths. And the scientists, because I always joked, I ran more of an English language lab than I ran a scientific lab. I would spend most of my time correcting horrific English. And scientists don't realize you spend actually about 80% of your time writing. That's what you do. You're writing grants, you're writing pictures, you're writing papers. And we stop writing essays at 15. and we are terrified to write. So that's hopeless. So we'll teach them how to write policies and construct narratives and things. So that's one way we're addressing it. And if it goes well, which I'm sure it is, because the feedback I've got from the students that I've road tested this idea on is very positive, we'll roll that out more broadly. It's not compulsory, it's completely voluntary, but it's just another way we can try and upskill our students, make them hopefully even more attractive. But it would be something that would be very, very open to broadening out, because I think particularly the science package could be quite interesting. Having said that, they could go immediately to the Royal Society, who have developed a series of booklets for judges to give them key facts on what does it really mean when you're doing DNA fingerprinting and et cetera, because they recognised that particularly in that profession, there was a real deficit of scientific knowledge, and yet they're making profound decisions and judgments, listening to experts but not quite understanding. So they've produced a series of booklets that address some of these issues. So that's, and again, generally on the Royal Society, publications are all downloadable and free, so they might want to have a rummage there, and there'll probably be something very useful as well.
I am conscious of time, but let me squeeze in one more question before I add one of my own towards the end. I think the gentleman in a blue shirt here had a question. Yeah.
Hi, Mark Landler. I work for the New York Times. I was a fellow in 1997. You actually answered about 80% of what I wanted to ask, which was about this issue of skilling journalists. I guess the only thing I would ask as perhaps a quick add-on is it seems to me that climate and COVID were really quite different, because one was sudden and evolving and mysterious for the first several months. The other is a sort of a well-established scientific reality about which there isn't much dispute in the academic world. So I guess what I'm wondering is, just on climate, and you mentioned your husband's a climate researcher, how much of it is about the science and helping people understand the science, and how much of it is about helping people explain it to a non-scientific audience? Because it seems to me that's much more the issue with climate than perhaps it was with COVID, where the science was so mysterious for the first few months of it.
I wish my husband was here to listen to you. You are spot on, in my opinion. They just haven't, I think, got the narrative right, the storytelling. The scientists haven't. That's the problem, in a nutshell. And I think they've got to work harder with you. There's a real opportunity there to get the story better. I think you're right. It's been a hard-won exercise, frankly, because I've been 28 years married, watching the journey from people didn't believe it, nobody believed it, to everybody accepts it, apart from the deniers out there. So the fact that it's scientifically completely accepted actually has been a hard-won journey, but the storytelling has not been good. It's just, and even right now, the solutions to it, which actually are staring us in the face, and we need to get on with it. We've got to bury the CO2 really quick, because it's, we're not going to have time to scale up all this other stuff. It's a story, and we're just not getting that story out clearly. So we're just waiting and waiting for this magic scaling up of all these magic alternative energies, and meanwhile we're warming up like mad. Look at us tonight. And the first thing to do is to, tackling a symptom of a disease, is to get rid of that, because that's causing the problems, whether we like it or not. And the people that are best placed to do it, unfortunately, the people that, are on the naughty step. So, we've just got to get the story better. So, I'll put you in touch with my husband, and we've got to get that. The other thing with the climate one, it's a bit of a philosophical one, if I could digress. Obviously, COVID's acute. Most things we deal with as societies and as humans, as animals, we're very good at dealing with things in the immediate, or in our generation, because it's going to affect us. If we're going to make a change as a behaving animal that's a bit uncomfortable, changing our quality of life or reward systems, we're okay if we can see the payback now. I challenge you to give me an example in the history of done something now that's a bit uncomfortable for something that is going to happen generations' time. That was where we were when the climate thing started to brew. And we just haven't done that as a society. And people say, we've done war, but wars is now, right? And it might be helpful for the next generation, but it's certainly helpful for yourself. Same for being vaccinated. We don't, and I can't think of, nobody's been able to, when I've set that challenge out, give me an example of something we've done as a human race where we've made a decision that makes life a bit more, uncomfortable or different, because that's going to produce profound benefits 2 generations down the line. And that's the problem for the climate. Now, the reality is it's gone really quicker than we thought, so we're in it now, so we're feeling it. So that might pace it up, I think the lens about it being a big medical health problem and the impact on health will help the storytelling and get people probably a little bit more ready to engage with then what's the solution. But it's all about the storytelling, and I think they have, with the best of intentions, it's just not worked.
Let me close with the final question, and I'm happy to play the bridge between Mark and introductions. Perhaps we could save it for the dinner, because I'm very conscious of time, and I'd just like to move things forward. We talked about this a little bit. The kids don't care about the news, but the kids care about the climate.
Yeah.
This is a celebration of 40 years, but it's also for our institute looking forward. Mm-hmm. What gives you hope, Vice Chancellor, when you speak to the younger students? Because these are people who were born during the financial crisis, lived through a pandemic, are facing a much different situation than what we grew up with, where there is this real threat of climate that is on us. What gives you hope in an environment like that?
No, it's a great. I mean, the students are great. I have to say, again, I am so fortunate in this position to interact, and I do a lot of very close interactions with the students. I do dog walks with them, student breakfast, so I can stay close to them because I really enjoy that student contact, and it gives me a sense of what's going on, and so I can be close to the sort of issues and start to pattern match, if there are common themes coming through. So I love the student engagement, and I mean, on the whole, they are just, a fabulously inspiring group of individuals who, of course, are in that young phase. They've got hope, they've got energy, etc. But they are very, very worried. They're probably overly worried and anxious in a way that I don't remember my generation being about all sorts of things beyond the climate. So that's one of the things we need to help them with, is just to, settle down a bit and to help their thinking, whether it's the free speech, whether it's solutions around climate, what actually are the practical solutions around how we can solve this issue. So that you can utilize all that incredible energy and willingness to help in the right direction to really realize solutions. And I think there's a lot of work still to do in that domain. But I have a lot of hope with them because of that just brilliance that they've got and the optimism that they share. And again, I think we've all got to play our part a little bit in just recognizing that we are handing over things in a bit of a damaged state, and therefore we do have responsibility to help think and shape how they're going to think about the solutions for that, and take our role in, again, coming up and working with them to support those solutions. But, I'm an optimistic person by nature, and so I will remain optimistic about the students and the hope that I think they can bring to us. But I don't think we should be sitting on our laurels and just assuming they've got it. We can just let them pick up the mess. So, yeah.
Since you quoted Lady Gaga, I should return the compliment with Taylor Swift and say, at this point, we should shake it off and step towards dinner. But thank you very, very much on behalf of all of us. It's been an absolute honor and privilege to have you with us.
Pleasure to be here. Congratulations again. Well done.
And thank you all for being a fantastic gathering. Shall we move towards drinks and dinner?
Great.
Shall I ask someone to help you with that? Okay, excellent. I'll just clip this. There you go. Thank you.